Добрый день, уважаемые участники вебинара. Меня зовут Ольга Лукьянова, и я руководитель кураторской службы факультетов дизайна и дизайна интерьеров Высшей школы «Среда обучения». Сегодня мы продолжаем нашу серию лекций «Встреч вне границ», и это уже, получается, 4-я лекция по направлению дизайн интерьеров. Встречи по направлению дизайн интерьеров проходят по средам 19 или 20:00. За расписанием вы можете посмотреть на нашем сайте. А также встречи проходят по направлениям психологии и по направлению дизайна. Психология – это вторники, дизайн – это четверги. То есть завтра будет встреча по направлению дизайна. Напоминаю, что все записи лекций доступны на нашем YouTube-канале, и их можно смотреть как на английском языке, так и на русском языке. Запись текущей лекции будет доступна уже завтра, и у вас есть возможность в прямом эфире в чатике задать все вопросы нашему спикеру. Наш спикер – это Мэри Берг. Она расскажет о реновации и адаптивном дизайне. Мэри, немножечко расскажу про нее. Она уже 40 лет занимается архитектурой и дизайном как в США, так и за рубежом. Она является основателем одноименной фирмы Berg Design and Architecture, специализирующейся на фирменных жилых, гостиничных и коммерческих проектах. Является профессором в университете Прат, занимала ведущие дизайнерские должности в таких громких проектах, как ребрендинг культовых жилых районов, офисов бывшего президента Билла Клинтона, реконструкции знаменитого отеля Лоуэлл на 63-й Восточной улице и международные коммерческие проекты в качестве ведущего дизайнера сингапурского офиса KPF Interior Architects. Немножко про регламент сегодняшней встречи, как обычно, 1,5 часа. Час Мэри будет рассказывать нам лекцию, и 30 минут это будет серия вопросов-ответов. То есть вы можете на протяжении всей лекции задавать свои вопросы, а уже когда будет время для того, чтобы я могла их задать, я буду их задавать. Также вы можете писать вопросы о том, как поступить к нам в сентябрьский набор, и мы с удовольствием вам в чатике на это все ответим. На этом все. Мэри, здравствуйте.
Hello. Hi. Greetings from New York. It's a beautiful sunny day, which it hasn't been for a couple of days, and reasonably cool. So it's a good day to talk about interiors. Thank you for having me. I suspect that some of you are already engaged in interior design. Some of you are studying interior design. Some of you are just interested in interior design. Interior design is a very large subject, very large, complex subject. I don't have a prayer of getting through the entire thing in an hour. I've been teaching professional practice in interior design now for 16 years. And the practice changes from year to year. I think it has changed significantly in the past year because of COVID. But I will try my best. It is a very broad practice that combines all kinds of different skills. And I think one of the primary skills is imagination. I've been doing this for 47 years. I still wake up every day. I still am engaged every day. I still find it interesting. I find it's ever changing. And I'm ready to engage in the people, the process, and the products. And there are a lot of P's in interior design. We'll go into that later. When I was a child, I lived in Minnesota, which is in the middle of the United States. And it's very cold there. It is very cold there, the way it's cold in Siberia. And interestingly enough, the cold climate forced an architect named Victor Gruen to design a building that took a typical building type and kind of turned it on its ear. And that was the retail shopping mall. Americans like to shop a lot. But if you're out in the middle of the Midwest in the cold, it's very cold and very difficult to do. And so what he did was he enclosed the shopping experience. And I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a picture of this thing. Here we go. Share. So just there, at the top, and I'm going to keep I'm going to keep both sides of the PowerPoint um, viewable. At the top, you see what's called Southdale, and Southdale took the shopping experience and turned it into an interior space. Ta-da, interior space. And it made it possible for young people like me to go and navigate and stay inside and stay warm. And what was most significant about it is that the inside of the space was more important than the outside of space. And in a date I will not give you because it was a long time ago, I recall I had gone off to school, and I intended to be an attorney. I intended to be a lawyer. And all of that changed when I went to San Francisco with my family and saw a project. This project, it's called Ghirardelli Square. And as it turns out, I saw it 3 days ago. I was just in San Francisco, and that reminded me of what a real mind-changing experience it was to walk into Ghirardelli Square, because Ghirardelli Square was an old warehouse that was converted into another retail experience. But in this case, this was not a new building. This was an old building that was repurposed and recycled. It became a multi-purpose indoor shopping environment near Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. It's still going today. So I recall looking at it and thinking to myself, old buildings, new life. It was a galvanizing thing. I went back to college. It captured my 19-year-old imagination. And I changed my career direction. I went back to New York, and I applied to the Historic Preservation Program at Columbia University, and then went to architecture school. So I am trained as an architect, but when I came out of school, there was a serious recession in New York. And all of the projects that we were able to work on were renovation projects. So in point of fact, I've done relatively little new building. I have pretty much worked on the insides of buildings. And it has become a career that, as one of my colleagues have characterized it, it's design where it doesn't rain. To this day, if asked what my firm does, we do renovations, interiors, adaptive reuse, and historic preservation. It is a profession that has allowed me to do many different buildings, many different types, and work all over the world. Projects large and small in New York and abroad. I spent a year in London. I've also spent 6 years in Singapore. It has been a very satisfying profession, and that's indicative of what interior design can be, because it takes many forms. There's so many people who characterize interior design as if you pick a building up and you turn it upside down, whatever falls out is interiors. And nothing could be further from the truth. Interior design it takes many, many forms. It is complex, it is fast moving, it's very fast moving. It's creative, it's innovative, it's very visual, and it's a lot of fun. Once upon a time, I spent a lot of time trying to define what interior design actually is. And after many years of considering that, I've pretty much given up. The more you draw a line around interiors, the more likely it is that you're going to be wrong. Interior designers and interior design practices do many things and everything, from whole buildings down to a chair. So the scope of projects runs the gamut. Interior designers can design standalone buildings. Interiors on their own can team with architects to complete a comprehensive design direction for a new building. They can limit their services to do nothing but FF&E, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that most people think of as typically being interior design for hospitality spaces or office spaces. Just as they can realize image making spaces for residential projects. It runs all ends of the spectrum. But what an interior designer does is distinct from what architects do. Because think about it, what architects do is create volumes. It is a three-dimensional thing. Interior designers create space. They differ in a very significant way, because the most successful interior is designed by the person who best speaks to the needs of the occupants. That's the interior designer. And that's because the end users, the people, are integral to the equation. It means the conversation needs to be extended beyond simply the bricks and mortar that is the building. You have to think about who's going to occupy it, and you have to think about how they're going to occupy it. And that is integral to the process. And at the end of the day, the people are the largest elements in this whole conversation. They really are the drivers, from the largest parts to the smallest parts. Interior designers also integrate space differently. They think in terms of the space they occupy rather than observing. They are occupants. So they always relate to the space that way. And it's also very different in that as a discipline, as a profession, hospitality architects design hotels. Healthcare architects design hospitals. Education architects design schools. But interior designers throughout the length of a career may very well do all of those things, any of those things. It's truly a horizontal profession, and really affords a great deal of opportunity for a very diverse practice. Their scopes may represent all of the typical phases of a project, from the very beginning to the very end, and may be very limited, maybe a very limited part. But it means that the interior designer always has the opportunity to be part of the conversation. Also keep in mind that every building has an interior. Every building has an interior. And repurposing an existing building is the most sustainable thing that you can do, given our evolving worldwide climate crisis. It's very important to keep that in mind. So the opportunities worldwide are very, very extensive. Look around you. There's opportunity to your left and right. And at the core of what we do, it really is entrepreneurship. We look at the design process entrepreneurially. We engage to find the opportunities and to rethink and reimagine space. And that relates both to our practice and what we do. It also relates to the career that you can have. If you look at it entrepreneurially, there is a wonderful definition that was developed by author Howard Stevenson at the Harvard Business School. And rather than just characterizing entrepreneurship as someone who starts a business, entrepreneurship, as as Stevenson characterizes it, is the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled. It means it's very open-ended and very applicable to interior design and interior design practice. It means that at the center of this is an idea, and the idea is what drives you. And seeing the idea turned into a solution, because ultimately interior designers are problem solvers, and problem solvers who really are equipped to devote themselves, to direct themselves to a wide variety of situations. So entrepreneurship as the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled, you just don't acknowledge the fact that there are limitations. The limitations actually become something that is a plus, is something that guides you, because at the end of the day, buildings speak to you. They really do. It sounds spooky, but they do. Buildings tell you what they need to be. So as long as you have got the appropriate mindset, the solution will come to you. And you may want to work for a firm, and you may want to go out on your own. It's about understanding yourself at the same time as understanding the realities. And some of these are business realities of your professional setting, where you're working and what you're doing, and figuring out how to make the two of those things sync and making it mutually beneficial, whether you're working for a firm or whether you're working on your own. The umbrella term interior design affords a broad range of opportunities to put your lessons learned to work, and creating a rich and beneficial roadmap to define your professional experience. So if I were able to do it, I would ask you all how many of you want to be interior designers, but we don't have that capability, but that's fine. The reality is that relatively few designers wind up sitting and designing constantly. And I know it's a frustrating thought to my students at Pratt Institute, because they all have this idea in their mind that they're just going to sit there and design constantly. Interior design is a really complex profession, and you will find yourself balancing the creative side with the analytical and the technical, because at the end of the day, it's all got to work and it's all got to balance. So you will be managing just as much, whether you realize it or not. You will be managing just as much as you will be designing. And as you go forward, and if you have a business, you will find yourself managing even more than you're designing. And that's a reality. If you want to work for a firm, you need to have a good idea of who you are, what you want to do, and what you want to do with it, and where you want to do it, and what you bring to the table. Because the reality is that these are very personal relationships. Again, it gets back to the people. It is almost like a marriage, and not all marriages work, as I'm sure we're all aware. So you need to have a good sense of where you are and where you want to be. And at the end of the day, regardless of where you want to go, set goals, and set goals that satisfy you, not somebody else's ideas, because it's very easy to be influenced by what other people think you should do. Set goals that satisfy you, understand what your purpose is, and be patient. Things take time, and don't be afraid to change direction. Don't be afraid. And I will tell you that probably you will change direction, because that's how life is, and circumstances change, and you will probably find yourself growing out of something you thought you wanted to do originally and moving into something else. And that's okay too. There are students who characterize that as a plan B. You know, plan A is what you think you want to do, and plan B is what you do if you aren't able to realize plan A. But that's not a plan B. It actually is a different direction, and that's okay. People shouldn't judge others. It's what works for you, and not your parents, and not your friends, and not your spouses, not your peers. It's you. Clarify your purpose, know what you want and why it's important, because you're gonna have to work hard to get it. It is a lot of work, and you better like it because you're going to be doing a lot of it. Some goals take time to achieve, so that's why you have to be patient, and then be honest with yourself. This is really a difficult question. You have to be honest with yourself in assessing whether your temperament, your habits, your behavior contribute to your goals or become obstacles, because these things have to mesh and they have to work, or you will be very frustrated and find yourself failing. And that's not what we want you to do. Unexpected circumstances always turn up, and it can affect your ability to reach your goals. There are so many different, at some point, I hesitate to put up a list of the different areas of practice that you might be able to pursue. They kind of fall out into two distinct, for want of a better way to do it, two distinct ways. There's commercial practice, there's residential practice, there's subcategories to each of them. Residential practice is clear enough. Residential practice, which is probably the most numerous, but having very different scale, is, you know, people's homes, people's apartments, apartment buildings, multifamily, all of that, and things that are related to that, things that are similar. On the other hand, you have commercial practice, which could be workplace where people work. It could be education. It could be hospitality. It could be institutional, museums and such. Could be governmental, which is a significant area of practice here in the U.S. The U.S. government really fosters some wonderful design, innovative programs. Industrial facilities, transportation, the mind reels at all of the possibilities that you might want to pursue. Should you wish to go out on your own, you can do this with a firm, you can do this out on your own. Should you wish to go out on your own, it becomes a question of understanding what it is you're going to have to consider. The reality is that design is often viewed as a commodity. You will do your best to present a proposal to a potential client, and they will look at you and say, well, this person will do it for that much less money. The money is not the point. It becomes the value of what your work is worth. And that is something that you have to understand from the very beginning. You as a designer have value no matter what situation you're in. Clients are very demanding and they expect more every day in every way. And it's a function of competition, and you have to understand how to engage in the competition. The creativity is important, but of course, it must be combined with combining the inventive with business knowledge and with a deep understanding of your value of design and professional service. And money is a tool. I'll say that again. Money is a tool. It's a goal. It's a goal, but it's a tool. Money means that you are able to do more things. Money means that you have the ability and the wherewithal to navigate without being held back. So money is a good thing. How to actually build a practice that makes money is a complex set of conditions. Interiors is highly competitive, and it can be very profitable depending on how you decide to conduct your business. It is a business. It combines elements of management and operations, and they are critical to success. Interior design practice requires balancing business savvy and strategies, plus the protocols that any business will need to satisfy for success, and considering growth, longevity, and profitability. So there is a methodology there that you have to develop that allows your business to grow and move on and become larger and be able to maintain itself. And that never leaves you. That's the one thing that really distinguishes being out on your own. It's a business and it never leaves you. You can never get away from it. So be sure you are able to bear that responsibility. Business conditions can vary from location to location, from market sector to market sector. When I say market sector to market sector, the business of hospitality is a very different business from healthcare. It is a very different business from education. And you have to understand what those specific market sectors mean in order to be able to move from one to the other, or in order to be able to be successful. But at the end of the day, you want to conduct your business in a way that it makes a profit. And I'm not going to explain that to you right now. At the beginning of this lecture, Maria offered to teach me the alphabet in 33 minutes. I cannot teach you how to run a business in half an hour. I can't do that. So numbers don't lie. And at the end of the day, you want to conduct your business in such a way that it makes a profit. And that's the point, mostly. A poorly run business can derail client relationships. If you're not running your business properly, the clients won't want to deal with you. And it's inevitable that challenges will happen. But if the business is not run successfully and it doesn't sustain a profit, it's going to make no difference how creative you're going to be. Your business will fail. It just will fail. It just won't work. And that's a reality that those who are unprepared to do this face. The rules and processes of interior design are aligned with those of architecture and related disciplines, and they need to work together. And methodologies need to sync, because interiors is a team sport. There is, even though there is an I, there is no I in interiors. Interiors takes a village. You would be amazed at the number of people that even my small practice has to engage with in order to do a project. And that becomes increasingly true as the world becomes more sophisticated. You find that borders are crossed and disciplines are crossed, and becoming savvy in all of these different things requires getting the help of people with knowledge that is supplemental to yours, but that taken together makes it a successful team. Skills are developed as working as a part of the team, and you learn lessons from others. You learn to schedule, for instance, by paying attention to how long it takes to accomplish common tasks. Scheduling is very important because scheduling is part of the core of becoming profitable. Something that takes too long is not going to be profitable. And being responsible, and you learn to schedule, and then you learn to apply those lessons to other tasks and integrating them with other tasks. So everything is a network. Um, and learning to manage, learning the tasks involved in getting a job out, in meeting with a client, in balancing the responsibilities of all the team players, plays a critical role in a designer's success. The designer should control the project. The project should not control the designer. And then you get to the whole point of this exercise, is client relationships. Because without clients, we wouldn't have businesses, right? Without a client, whether you work for a firm or not, whether you have your own business or not, without a client, we would not have a business. Making those client relationships is the lifeblood of the firm. And that's also called marketing. You have to be able to make connections with clients in order to sustain growth. I can recall, I will tell a very brief story of when I got my first big project years ago, when I was out on my own. And I was very excited because it was quite a large fee, or I thought it was quite a large fee at the time. I actually didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but I do now. And it was quite a large fee, and I had lunch with a colleague who was an agent for a vendor, a textile manufacturer. And she said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And I think it was the fee was 180,000 US dollars. And she said, "Okay, how long is the project going to take you?" And I said, "It's going to take 24 months." And she said, "Okay, divide $180,000 by 24 months. Is that number that you get going to be sufficient to run your business and live your life?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Then you better go out and get some more business." Because the reality is, when you're working on projects, the good news is you're doing the project. The bad news is that as you work on the project, there is less project there to work on, and less money to make, because you've already gotten it. So you've got to go out and find more work to keep the people who work for you busy and to sustain the growth of the firm. So marketing is the lifeblood of the firm. And without the marketing, the firm runs out of gas. Now, this is, it is who you know and who you want to know that makes projects happen. Marketing takes many forms, building on a range of skills and capabilities, from practices of all sorts, from practices to you as an aspiring professional. Because at the end of the day, the exercise is the same. Marketing yourself or marketing your business. And a presentation is the same. It's the end result that is different. And that's where money really becomes a tool, because it allows you to go out and do that. It allows you to have a better website. It allows you to have greater visibility. It allows you to make those contacts. Doing good work and having great client relationships enables you to have a good track record and a respected reputation. And that leads to repeat clients and more work. And that's the simplest way to do it. It's the most important way to do it. There's competition. And in considering competition, you've got to consider certain things. You've got to consider what your product is. Who are you? What's your brand? You are selling professional design services. Where, the place, where are you offering them? What is your marketplace? Is it in a particular area of practice? Is it a particular place? Where is it? Promotion. Do people know about you? Do people know who you are? Do they know what you do? And at what price? What's your price? Because at the end of the day, if you have competition, you're going to have to be able to explain what the value is that you bring to the table. So, and the bottom line question there that you have to ask yourself, regardless of what it is you do, is why you and not the other guys? Why you? How do you explain to somebody that they should hire you? If you're looking for a job, or if you're trying to land a client, why should they hire you and not somebody else? And that means that your brand is really very important to this whole transaction, because it is transactional. And so that gets back to the self-knowledge that I talked about earlier. You really do have to understand what your value is and what value you bring to this encounter. So other things that you have to keep in mind are people. One of the most powerful parts of practice are people. Who works for you? Who do you work with? Who do clients interact with? How skilled are they? How integrated are they into the work that you do? Because each firm differs. How able are they to be a substitute for you, should that become a necessity? Are you training people to be the best professional they can be within your firm? Are you learning skills that are integral to your professional development? How does that happen? People are really the variable here. And honestly, I will tell you that oftentimes a choice on the part of the client is based on not even the material they see, not even the reputation. It is the people they interact with, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to be working with them. So people become a very powerful part of this. And then what's your brand? What's the perception that a client has of you? Because that's something that should never, ever, ever be very far from your head. That brand really does answer the question, why you and not the other guys? Because the brand is understanding your value, what you have to offer, and how you compare to others. And that'll vary from time to time, but your brand should be consistent. And you should spend a fair amount of time in deciding what your mission is and deciding what your brand is, because that is your most powerful weapon. And being able to translate that into an image via your public relations, having people understand what it is you want to know about them, and then going out and actually selling that, because nobody's going to come and hire you if you don't go out and tell them, if you don't go out and engage, if you don't go out and network and understand who the clients are and where you're going to find them. And that involves a whole another level of creativity. It means that the work that you've done and the brand that you've established is really important in going out and making those connections. Because ultimately the connections are the, the currency that we'll be working with. I'm now 40 minutes into this, and realize that we haven't really looked at at something that, we are interior designers. We always like to see images. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears right now, and I'm going to show you a project that is typical and very untypical. I'm going to show you one project that took up probably a 3-year period for us. It was a very large project or a very small project, depending on what you think about. It involved not a very large building that was renovated. It involved a group of large buildings, and it's real prototype going forward. It is a building. It is something that's called Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town. And before I go into this, I'll show you a picture. This is the location that Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town was located. This is called the Gas House District. Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town is a development that was a development of buildings that was designed in the late 40s. This, if you watch my cursor right here, that is Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town. The smokestacks that the drum that you see here is that drum. Actually, one of the initiators in building this was the fact that that drum blew up. It's a gas drum, and it blew up, and it led a large insurance company here in New York to consider solving the needs of veterans returning from World War II to New York, and creating this housing development that is 80 acres. It is 80 acres on this is the East River in New York. It goes from 14th Street up to 23rd Street, and it is 11,232 apartments. That's a lot of apartments. That's a lot of buildings. 80 acres, 11,232 apartments. Here's another shot of what it looked like in 1949. This is an aerial shot of what it looks like now. We were approached by a very large property developer called Tishman Speyer, who purchased Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town in 2006 for what was at the time a record price. It was $5.6 billion US when they bought this. And to explain the background, they bought this with the intention of renovating the large majority of 11,232 apartments with the idea of making them market rate. Not to get too granular about this, in New York, there are laws that date back to World War II that controlled the amount of increases that can be made in rents on buildings that were in existence at that point. These were buildings that were covered by rent stabilization, is what it's called. In the early 90s, New York changed the laws to allow buildings to be destabilized and to reach a market rate. And as tenants leave, if you renovate an apartment, it means you can raise the rents. So Tishman Speyer bought this with 11,000 apartments, with the idea that as tenants would leave, they would renovate them. The market for rentals in New York was very competitive. And in order to compete, there were certain things in this development that they didn't have and were not going to be able to provide. And in order to be competitive, we had to figure out how to provide that and what kind of modifications had to be made in order to achieve that. So what we did was a master plan, understanding that what was important to new tenants in New York was having what are called amenities. People wanted to have places that they could go. New York apartments are very small, or comparatively small, and they wanted to have facilities because this is it's a very large site, very, very large site, and they didn't want to have to. They wanted to have these things accessible, and if they weren't in the building, they wanted to have them close. So what we did was go in and survey these buildings, and there actually is to the north another piece of this, but it's not on the master plan, and understand that there were spaces that were being used as storage spaces throughout Peter Cooper and Stuyvesant Town that could be converted into amenities that would provide the kinds of services that would attract the kinds of tenants who would pay that kind of rent. So we embarked on a program of identifying the spaces that could be used. We also realized that when it was designed, there was this circle here that really had no identity to speak of. There was nothing happening on this circle. It was just there. It was just the center. Somebody drew it and they built it that way. And we realized that if we put these things, if we put these amenities, if we put these function spaces on the circle, that would represent a town square. So we created a town square. We created a master plan that now had a center and had activities that would drive people to the center. So it would behave much more like a thoughtfully planned facility. So we did these things in sequence. The first thing that the new tenants wanted, the first thing was to have a new identity for these buildings, because as you can see, these are not attractive buildings. These are not attractive. In fact, these buildings became the prototype for low-income housing that the city of New York built subsequently. And many people think that these are, quote, projects, low-income housing. And they're not. They actually are quite nice on the inside. It's the outside of the building that looks bad. So the first thing was to create an identity for the outside. So we developed a treatment for the street level facades that really was much more modern and in keeping with the image that they wanted to create. And then we went back in. The first piece that needed to be available, and this is kind of consistent with buildings in New York, was to have a fitness center. Everybody wants to go to the gym. And they had a grocery store that went out of business, that was sitting there empty. And that grocery store we converted into what we call Oval Fitness. The Oval as taken from the name of the town center as the Oval. That was called Stuyvesant Oval. And so we created this very hip place to go and work out, right? And then subsequent to that, if you're going to have lots of people coming to Peter Cooper Village and Stuyvesant Town, well, you're going to have to handle them someplace that is a portal. So this became the leasing office. I can see that I've got some wonky things that are still hanging around from PowerPoint, for which I apologize, but this became the project for the leasing office that actually is directly behind that facade. So the leasing office became how people saw Stuyvesant Town for the first time. And we created an interior space that had a media wall that was visible not just from the sidewalk, but from the street. If you were in a taxi and you're driving by, this wall is what you see. And actually, it has been upgraded to be a much smarter media wall. This was at the time of the technology was still, it is now an interactive wall. Here it is from another angle. And that became the first element of the reimagined Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town that people saw and signed on the dotted line, of course, to come in and rent an apartment. So the next order of business was to figure out what these amenities were. And there were 4 of them, and we figured out functions that people would want to buy into and would use on a regular basis. So we started out, they're not very close to a movie theater. So we started out with a screening room. The screening room is a very small cinematheque. This is the screening room right here. It's called Oval Film, and it is effectively a small movie theater and a party room that people can rent and have your own Hitchcock Film Festival, should you wish. And this is a better shot of the outside. And this is the prototypical glass facade that we created to be the symbolic enclosure for all of these amenities. So this is consistent throughout. This is the inside. This is where you party. And should you wish to follow World Cup, you actually have monitors here that if you leave the screening room, you can watch the World Cup here. You won't miss a thing. And this is the screening room. What was very interesting about this is that in order to have a floor that is raked, a floor that is at an angle and maintain the sight lines, we actually had to excavate. We actually had to take a foot out of the slab. We broke up the slab and actually lowered the slab in order to maintain the sight lines. It is an enormously successful space that is rented on a regular basis by families who are having birthday parties with 32 kids and such. And then the second is Oval Study. Oval Study is another one of those little pods. This is what it looks like. It becomes a study space for or an internet cafe. People who don't really have work at home space can go here. Of course, that has changed somewhat in COVID. I believe they are open again now. New York is opening up again. And you can go, it has a lending library. You can go and take out books. The third one is Oval Lounge. And Oval Lounge is the party space. It is strictly a party space. I have actually had colleagues who have come back and told me that they have attended events in this space, and that is still operational. And then, skip over that. There is a fourth space that I'm not going to go through, and that is Oval Kids. It's a kid space that is very playful and very colorful. That is available in case your child has a birthday party and you don't want to have a tremendous mess. You can take them down to Oval Kids and have them make a mess there. And so these were all made available at the same time. In parallel, we were considering the apartments themselves. We were considering, I'm not sure you're going to be able to read this. I don't think you're going to be able to read that one, so I'm going to skip one. We were considering whether it would be worthwhile to combine apartments and make them larger. There was a while there where the United Nations staff were considering moving down to Peter Cooper Village in Stuyvesant Town because the apartments were large. And if we could make them larger, it would be desirable for whole families who had moved to the United States to rent an apartment. So these were studies that we did for the different iterations of how we might reconfigure these buildings. And in the end, it actually became unworkable because it meant too many things had to be relocated. But it was an interesting study that if they ever want to do it, it is available. So these are images of the apartments. These are the reconsidered apartments for Stuyvesant Town, which are much smarter and actually in the marketplace in New York are quite commodious. They are on the average larger than you will now find in apartment buildings in New York. This is a typical kitchen, which looks pretty much as looks pretty much as good as you will find in new buildings. Plus, it's got a window. So often, kitchens in New York do not have windows. This has got a window. And then in Peter Cooper, which is the portion that was off our master plan, these are images for the reimagined Peter Cooper apartments. And again, what you will see is very much more a function of the kitchen. That's what people always look for, is kitchen. And then one very large issue was that none of these buildings have lobbies. And if you're going to pay market rate in New York, you're going to want a doorman. You are going to want a lobby and a doorman. And these buildings don't have that. So what we did was we created satellite spaces where if you are getting a package delivered from FedEx, you can have them delivered here, or you can have them delivered, actually this is off here, but there is a second one over here, to a concierge space where the package can be accepted, and they will send you an email or send you a text saying you've got a package. They will take you dry cleaning, and will be open far longer hours. Means you don't have to, after coming back from a long day in the office, you don't have to go to the dry cleaner. You don't have to go and pick up a package from the post office. They can be delivered right there. And those spaces were done. The one that I pointed to on the master plan is the Oval Concierge for Stuyvesant Town. And then there is a second. This is Peter Cooper. And this is actually a little self-contained building that is a kiosk that was just landscape space that was open. And we converted it into a concierge space. So as it turns out, the renovation program is still going on. We did this project with 4 separate teams. There was a team for the fitness center. There was a team for the leasing office. There was a team for the amenities, and there was a team for the apartment renovations. So it was the work of, I would say, probably 12 people at different times, and had an MEP engineer, had a structural engineer, had a glazing consultant, had a lighting consultant, had an acoustical consultant. As I said, it was a cast of thousands, but is still going on and still operating and still just as successful. So I thought I would show you a very large small project or a large very small project. And to my clock, it looks like it's 1 o'clock.
Мэри, я так понимаю, можно задавать вам вопросы?
Absolutely. I'm waiting for the questions.
Супер. Во-первых, огромное спасибо за такую великолепную лекцию, за очень красивый взгляд. Просто мои глаза получили огромное удовольствие от таких прекрасных решений, от таких прекрасных интерьеров, от таких прекрасных зданий. Вот. И первый вопрос, он связан, вообще большинство вопросов будет связано именно с вами. Вот у вас огромный опыт. У вас огромный опыт. Как изменилось проектирование и создание пространств в начале вашего пути и сейчас? Вот что для вас является самым большим отличием, которое вот вы иногда смотрите назад и думаете, как же мы так раньше жили? Или наоборот, почему мы сейчас так живем?
It changes. It's changed in the past year. It has changed significantly. It has changed in different ways. When I started out, and remember, I was trained as an architect, and I am a licensed architect. I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, but I really have always worked on the insides of buildings, and I've been very happy and very proud to do that. The role of the interior designer when I started out was that of a second string, of secondary, and really in the minds of most firms, most practices, was limited to things like furniture, fixture, and equipment. And architects really held on to that responsibility. I think that part of that, now this is in the United States. The United States is different. I have also lived in Europe. I have also lived in Asia, where the attitude is different, where the practice of the inside of the building is not so differentiated from that of the outside of the building. But I think that over a period of years, the practice of interiors has grown to cover a far greater scope, and interior designers have taken advantage of their intuitive talents to expand their scope to encompass much more comprehensive services, and to avail themselves of the assistance of consultants to make that happen. So I think that clients have become much more savvy. The public has become much more savvy, and they are much more interested in a higher level of design. And that means that those who are able to provide that have got a very important role. So an increasingly important role. So as it turns out, much of what we see is being led by interior designers. In the United States, practices that were considered interior design practices have now expanded to cover architectural services, such that a client can go to a Gensler or go to a Perkins and Will, and they will get all of the services that they want. This specific firm, yeah. Okay, it's Gensler. Gensler is a very large practice, and Perkins and Will. These are two American practices that actually are international practices. So, and in understanding that, they have transcended the limitations. And what's also interesting is that interior design as a practice, as I said, I stopped trying to give it a definition years ago, because interior designers do all kinds of things, which actually is far more common in Europe and Asia. Interior designers do all kinds of things. Nobody draws a line around it. And so as the purveyor, the very talented purveyor of the best design solutions, interior designers really have risen to the forefront and become so much more important to the development of design and thinking going forward, because effectively the things that we're dealing with affect people. It's like sustainability affects people. As I said earlier, the most successful interior is done by the person who can successfully satisfy the end user. So this becomes, mind forward, and becomes a way of life and a way of thought. Interior designers really are thought leaders at this point. And that is true around the world. And that's good. Now, also, another way that it's changed is there's a digital transformation. And we are coping with that now because, with the development of technology, there's so many more sources for everything. So that means that there's so many more solutions that interior designers in general, in fact, I actually try to consciously refer to designers rather than interior designers because it gets complicated, but designers, because that's what we do, we design, need to be much more aware of what their brand is and the services they provide. They need to be much more aware of how they stake a claim to a reputation, because being able to differentiate yourself from your competitors, you need to be much more self-reflective. It's just dealing with the amount of information that's out there. You need to prioritize, and you need to be able to focus and not be confused by the amount that's out there. Just because you can get 300,000 answers to a question doesn't mean that you need to pay attention to all 300,000. 1, 2, 3, maybe. I think that people need to be more discriminating, and that they are more discriminating. The bar is higher now, but I think interior designers are amply able to meet the requirements, if that makes sense.
Вот.
Yes.
Мэри, это так интересно. Вот вы говорите какую-то мысль, дальше продолжаете, у меня возникает вопрос, и следующим предложением вы отвечаете на вопрос, который у меня возникает в голове. Вы прекрасный спикер. И да, следующий тогда вопрос, который у меня возник, вот, на который я не очень все-таки хочу его задать. А где именно в США кончается задача архитектора и начинается задача дизайнера интерьеров?
That's a very good question. Okay. I didn't talk about regulations at all. I kind of alluded to the fact that there were regulations, there were things you had to do. In all 50 states, in all 50 states, there are requirements. There are educational and licensing requirements for practitioners. All 50 states have regulations that apply to architects and engineers. Only 26, and it depends on what you consider, but it's about 26 states have licensing for interior designers. And the licensing really only says who can call themselves an interior designer. It doesn't say anything about the practice. And there is a long-standing difficulty between architects and interior designers on who gets to hold the pencil. Architects and engineers are the only ones who are allowed, who are licensed to allow them to file with building authorities. So if it has to do with the building authorities, you have to have an architect. And interior designers have lobbied to be able to do that, and have only been successful in perhaps 3 states. As I said, the other 26 have legislation that defines who can use the title interior designer. By the way, New York is not one of them. New York has got a very odd situation in that the title is voluntary. So anyone can call themselves an interior designer. It gets complicated. There is a lack of definition of interior designer versus interior decorator. I don't know whether you have that distinction, but the people who deal more in fabrics and finishes and furniture and things, that is their practice. They have that kind of narrow part, artwork and such, are generally considered interior decorators. They really don't get involved in the structure of the services and such. In the minds of the public, there is an overlap there that makes it very difficult to distinguish what you're getting. And it's made more complicated by the fact that at the end of the day, when you're talking about architecture, there is probably relatively little in most projects that really represent design opportunities other than the outside of the building. I mean, if an architect's designing a building, there's a lobby, there might be corridors, they might be amenity spaces. But in general, they are doing what we call core and shell. They are doing the services in the middle, the elevators, the stairs and such, and the shell, the envelope, the building envelope. So there is competition between the two. And that's actually where the statement that I made came from. The idea that the most successful interior is done by the person who speaks to the needs of the end user. That actually was made in response to an architect saying to me, well, listen, any architect can do an interior. And I said, well, that may well be. Yes, they can do an interior. They can do something on the inside of the building. That doesn't mean it's successful, right? It doesn't mean that it speaks to the needs of the people who occupy the space well, because that's what we do. We deal in multiples. We deal with minute decisions that contribute to the functionality of the space. So it has to be functional as well as be well designed. So it's a balancing act, and we are able to macro micro, if you know if that translates. Macro micro. You have to be up here and then zoom in to be able to understand how things are working and make sure that they are working well. So the relationship with architects is competitive. In certain areas, it is competitive but congenial. We are colleagues. And that is true in New York City, in Manhattan. We are all in competition, but we know about each other, and we kind of understand and respect each other's space. Outside of New York, there are still people who say, "Oh, you're not allowed to do that because you're only an interior designer." So, and it is a problem that is made more difficult by the overlap of related disciplines that also want a piece of the competition. We have people who are kitchen designers who just do kitchens. That's what they do. They do it very well. You have the decorators. So nobody wants to give up their piece of the pie. So it can be a highly competitive situation. Though I will say that given the way the market is developing, and given the way technology is developing, that is getting blurred. It is less clear as an issue, but I can tell you that there are parts of the United States where it is still an issue. It still isn't. And I will say, to some degree, it is a gender-based issue, because the majority of people in interiors tend to be female, and women have found great success in interior design, and have explored and fostered the development of other professionals. So it is a wonderful profession. It really is. And I hope that answered your question.
Да, это ответ. И я хотела такое спросить, то есть я услышала в ваших словах такой момент, что архитекторы и дизайнер интерьеров главным образом отличаются тем, что дизайнер интерьера, он как бы больше ориентирован именно на клиента, на того, на того человека, который будет пользоваться интерьером. Верно? То есть именно дизайнер интерьера любит клиента.
Correct.
Так, отлично.
Yes. It's part of our operating system. It's the questions that we ask. I think that the most important characteristic, and by the way, every semester I ask this question on the midterm exam. I said, what's the most important thing you can do as an interior designer? And it's interesting to see what they all say. But if you ask me, I would say, listen and pay attention. And what's also interesting is there was an article I have to follow up with some reading material, but there was an article that was in Architectural Digest a couple of days ago that basically said, if you want to foster creativity, quit reading books. Go out and look at things. Pay attention to things, because creativity is much more dynamic than that. Book learning is good, but I think when you go out and you are in a constant, I know I am. I'm always looking at things, always. Oh, what's that? And it is just the way I am. I mean, I'm just this funny, curious person. And it keeps the dynamic going. There's always something else to see. And there's always something that, and if you are an interior designer, you know this, you see something and you kind of file it away in your memory bank. And then all of a sudden, when you're trying to do something, you go, I remember. And you pull it out and you don't imitate it. you use that as a launching point. You use it as a touch point that leads you to something else and something that is better and different or not.
Великолепно. Следующий вопрос. Я их буду просто так один за другим отвечать. Просто знаете, Мэри, каждый ваш ответ, он настолько крутой и вдохновляющий, что я буду очень долго ими восхищаться, поэтому просто буду зачитывать вопросы. Вы сказали, что дизайнер интерьера – это командная работа. Что это командная работа. Да, дизайнер интерьера – это командная работа. Да? Как вы понимаете, что вот именно с этим человеком можно работать?
I apologize. There's going to be some drilling behind me. Somebody's got to drill the next unit. How do you know? You know my reputation. Yeah, I hope it's. Yeah, there's interior design going on, or either that or destruction. So how do you know? You know by reputation. As I said, especially here in New York, it's pretty collegial. So if you don't know, you can call somebody. So we trade information all the time. You know from having worked with them before, but we all have got kind of a roster of people who we've worked with, be they suppliers, be they consultants and such. We also are very generous in letting other people know when something has not gone well. So because it's part of your reputation, you are introducing these people to a client, and so the client will hold you responsible. So we are all very careful about that. We don't just hire somebody and hope it works. There is a level of due diligence, if you know that expression, in checking somebody out and looking at their work, and if necessary, getting recommendations from people for whom they've done work. So we actually do check on these things. And it's something that, it's, as I said, your reputation is at stake. You want to be careful. And if they're not performing, you tell them.
Хорошо. Мэри, а вы можете отказать клиенту в проектировании, если вы понимаете, что вы не можете, что человек вам не подходит? То есть те задачи, которые он перед вами ставит, они вот прям вам не нравятся, и вы не готовы к такому приступить? Или вы будете человека переубеждать?
Depends on the client, depends on the task. There was a client who came for, it was this, and it depends on if there's a prior relationship. There are ways to say no. There are lots of ways to say no. There are lots of ways to set up situations that actually say no, but it doesn't look like you're saying no. But you set up a situation where it's not possible. There are situations where I had a potential client come to me who wanted me to design a tanning salon, if you know what that is, where people get in these tanning beds and get tan, and I would not do that. I would not do that because I am Irish and have very delicate skin and understand that that is a way that people develop. So I would not do something that I thought was wrong, and I thought that was wrong. So I said no. There are times when a client will come to you, and I know this because I didn't say no at the time. There are times when clients will come to you and you kind of know that this is not necessarily going to go well. And you know, when you're starting out, when you're young, you think, I can make it work. You know what? No, you can't. If it sounds like it's not going to go well, it's not going to go well. And and sometimes that has to do with the task. Sometimes it has to do with the client themselves. So you kind of go with your instinct there. And again, it's a complicated issue. And that's why, you know, I said money is a tool. Money allows you to say no. Money allows you to say no and not have your business fall apart. Having some financial soundness allows you to maneuver. So I would say absolutely what you do over a period, over your experience, you develop an ability to either say no or to say, I think we should look at this. That's generally what I say. I think we should look at this. And there are times when, even though I don't get paid for it, I will look at something just to see if there is another possibility so that we can kind of short circuit that. And there have been a couple of times when I've withdrawn. There have been a couple of times when I've withdrawn. When I said, this isn't working. I simply no.
Хорошо, понятно. Тогда у нас время на самом деле уже подходит к концу,
Well,
поэтому...
in those situations, there were implications there that had serious legal implications. The client wanted to go ahead and do demolition without the permits. And there is no way I would stand for that. No. I could lose my license.
Это очень логично. Не в тот канал. Так, наш вебинар на самом деле подходит к концу, поэтому я сейчас буду задавать последний вопрос. Вопрос от наших слушателей, и мы будем с вами уже все прощаться. Последний вопрос. В России слово «реновация» приобрело отрицательный смысл, потому что в процессе расселения многие почувствовали себя немножечко обиженными, потому что они жили в хорошем месте, их переместили немножечко в более плохое место, и они считают, что им разрушили привычную их среду жизни ради прибыли строительных компаний. Как вот к самому проекту реновации относятся в США? Как вот жители, которые под это попадают, что они об этом думают, что они об этом говорят?
Well, who is I have to understand this. In renovating, are they obligated to move?
Да, они обязаны.
They are obligated to move.
Да. У них старые здания, которые находятся, возможно, в каком-то хорошем месте там, в центре города, но так как здание старое, их нужно переселить в более новое здание, которое, возможно, находится не в таком хорошем месте. Есть ли у вас вообще такое?
Queens, yeah, right. Which is, by the way, happening. Usually under those circumstances, there are, in New York, there are regulations where they can't, you can, under certain circumstances, be forced, or you can, the landlord can take back your space to renovate it. They can do that. But it becomes very difficult to do, because if they're doing that, they have to provide you with alternate accommodation. And you have something to say about that. And there is a very, very strong rent regulations. And there are departments in the city of New York that enforce those regulations. And a tenant can go and can go to court and start a lawsuit and tie up a landlord for a very long time. So usually these things are able to be negotiated. Now, but still, tenant rights in New York are a bit of a fight. And the real estate lobby in New York, the real estate developers are very influential. And I think on a case-by-case basis, there are mechanisms that would prevent you or would help you under those circumstances. Usually a landlord's going to want to do that in a beneficial way. So they would make some kind of offer to help you go someplace else, rather than get caught up. It's really complicated question, but they can't just force you. Something's got to happen. They can take back an apartment in order to accommodate a relative, somebody in their family. They want to do that. They can do that. But all of this stuff can be held up in court. There is, a kind of, there is a kind of litigious, there's a word in Russian for litigious, court-based, lawsuit-based dynamic, where somebody will go and try and stop something in court because they have the right to. You can. The problem becomes when you've got people who don't have the resources to be able to do that. Where you're talking about people who really don't have a lot of money, who are lower class, who don't have those resources. It can be problematic. But the rent regulations in New York are pretty stringent. And I suspect elsewhere they are too. I know in California they are. But it depends on where you are. To have somebody forced to go someplace less desirable, I think that's a problem all over. But I will say, when a landlord is renovating building, because one of the first project that I had on my own, that I was the project designer and the project manager, was the renovation of the Lowell Hotel on 63rd Street, which is really, still a wonderful hotel. And there was one tenant who was regulated, and she refused to go. And we were going to actually renovate the building around her. We built this thing that would contain her and keep her happy. And she finally gave up right before the construction started and left. But the owner had to pay her a lot of money to do that. And I've seen that in other situations. There are also, if you walk around New York, you can see buildings that are new buildings, and then built into the building is one little building because the person refused to leave. So in principle, that shouldn't happen, but it does happen, but then it doesn't happen. So kind of depends. And that, by the way, is probably the question that is the most common in interiors. It depends. I don't think I've really answered that question because it depends.
Это на самом деле показывает о том, как по-разному это все регулируется в России и в США. И это очень интересный ответ на самом деле. Да, Мэри, наше время вышло. Спасибо вам большое за такую прекрасную лекцию. Спасибо, что уделили время нам в среде обучения нашим слушателям.
But there's so much more.
Так, друзья, ну что ж, спасибо всем участникам лекции. Мы рады видеть вас на других вебинарах школы среды обучения и на встречах вне границ. Напоминаю, по средам у нас проходят лекции по направлению дизайн интерьеров. Приходите, жду вас через неделю, будет круто. И заходите на наш сайт, регистрируйтесь и добро пожаловать в среду обучения. Все, всем пока, хорошего вечера или доброе утро, если кто-то находится на другой стороне земного шара. Всем пока!